So our session here today is around collaboration and how we can and need to collaborate to tackle the climate emergency. I think we've talked already a little bit about interdisciplinarity, whole systems approaches, co-production methods, community-led projects. And I think working across sectors as well as across disciplines is clearly very important. But it's also not easy. My experience of working in the renewables and energy sector for nearly 25 years now is that interdisciplinarity has huge rewards, but it's also very difficult. So we've got a fantastic panel here today, and I'll put some questions to them in a moment. And also, if you would like to pose some questions, please do put them in the chat, and I'll try and use some of the questions that you pose here as well. And also, just to remind everybody that I suppose the overarching goal here is for us to hear from you all and understand what you think the real priorities for this climate alliance of GW4 universities should be. So thanks again for joining us, and please do put your questions and comments in the chat. Now, I was asked to give a brief introduction for each of the panelists today, but what I think I'd prefer to do, if possible, is ask our panelists to give a brief introduction of themselves, rather than me doing a poor job of talking about them and their area of expertise. So I'm just pausing there to give the panelists a little moment to be ready for that. So if I could go around the virtual room and ask each of the panelists to do that, a special prize for whoever can be the most concise. But if you could just introduce yourself and a little bit about your experience and expertise, that would be lovely. So I'll start with Professor Lorraine Whitmarsh, please. Lorraine.
Yes, hello. I'm a Professor of Environmental Psychology at the University of Bath and Director of the Centre for Climate Change and Social Transformations. Our work is really about the role that people play in tackling climate change. And I could stop there if that's enough.
That's great. Thank you very much, Lorraine. Could I now go to Paul Howard-Jones, please?
Hello, I'm a Professor of Neuroscience and Education at the University of Bristol in the School of Education, but the last 2 or 3 years, increasingly, I've been spending my time looking at climate change education, and I led the GW4 Climate Change Education Research Network last year.
Thank you, Paul. Could I now go to Sara MacBride-Stewart, please?
Hello, I'm Sara MacBride-Stewart. I'm an environmental sociologist in the School of Social Sciences, and I'm part of the Sustainable Places Research Institute at Cardiff University. I work in a range of areas from health to future inequalities, and also on co-constructing biosecurity solutions, looking at shared solutions for health, human health and forest health. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sara. That's great. Could I now go to Professor Emma Bland, please?
Hi, thanks, Bert. My name's Emma Bland. I work at the European Centre for Environment and Human Health, part of the University of Exeter. My background is non-traditional in that I am an associate professor of practice, so I came into this role with experience of building partnerships and working more outside the university sector than inside it, to be fair. And my recent work has been around looking at communities and sustainability and climate change and how that impacts our ability to survive the already built-in climate, so a focus on adaptation rather than mitigation.
Great. Thank you very much, Emma. And then finally, I'd like to go to Councillor Martyn Alvey, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Martyn Alvey, I am the portfolio holder for Environment and Climate Change at Cornwall Council. I've been the portfolio holder since May this year, when we had the local elections. Prior to that, I shadowed the portfolio for the previous 4 years. It encompasses everything from waterways, beaches and flood resilience, our areas of outstanding natural beauty and World Heritage sites, through to agriculture, fisheries, our council farms, but most important, I am leading up on our climate change action plan. And I'm the lead in seeing that green thread through the whole activity of Cornwall Council as we aim towards achieving net zero by 2030 as a region, and the challenge on us from the Prime Minister is to be the first net zero region in England.
Wonderful. Thanks very much, Martin. That's great. So I'll start off with a few questions, and then I'll try and keep my eye out for questions coming in on the chat as well. But what I would say to the panel as well is that we don't necessarily have to have an answer to every question from everybody on the panel. If you feel that things have been covered adequately, then that's fine, because I think then we'll get the most out of the time that we've got. So I'd like to start off with a question about collaboration, as you might expect, and ask the panel whether you could share with us some of your thoughts about your work in this area and the role of collaboration in there. I'm happy to hear things about failures and difficulties as well as about successes, because I think sharing what went wrong and what didn't work is just as valuable as what did work. So please feel free to do that. So if I could maybe go around and just ask you if you'd like to share some stories about recent research in this area and the role of collaboration in its broadest sense there. Maybe I could start with Lorraine again, if that's all right, if you'd like to share something.
Sure. I mean, I think, yeah, certainly just to echo your point about the importance of collaboration. I think the reason is that something like climate change is such a complex issue. It just affects us in so many ways and has no single solution, that we need insights from across all academic subjects, but also we need to engage with businesses and communities and local policymakers and others who may also have solutions and have insights into the problems themselves and be able to help us test out potential solutions. So I think collaboration, not just within universities, but also beyond them, is absolutely critical. I think one of the challenges might be that sometimes sometimes the timeframes in which we're working within academia don't necessarily match up with people working outside of academia, and that can be difficult. We seem to work on glacial timescales in universities sometimes, and we need real world solutions really, really quickly. And that, businesses and other organisations can be much more agile or have research needs that maybe need to be addressed more quickly. So I think timescale would be one of the challenges, but I certainly think it's absolutely critical that we try and sort of overcome that, and we have already found really productive ways of working, I think.
Thank you, Lorraine. Could I just ask, would anyone else like to come in next, please, if you sort of wave? Emma's keen, so Emma, please.
Thank you. I mean, just to sort of pick up that controversy versus spirit that Tim introduced there, but I think one of the interesting challenges is the way we structure our research questions and how we actually arrive at those questions. And there's a whole element missing in the way that we are funded to work. So we talk about collaboration, but actually we're funded to address a particular issue. So we put forward an idea. We're not actually funded to go out and find out whether our collaborators think that's the right question or the right approach. And often you're shoehorning some of that collaboration in and sort of under the end of a previous grant or using it in an unfunded method. And really we need to spend more effort and more time on understanding the real world challenges. We've just been embarking on a project around climate change and how do we support local organisations make adaptation decisions. And the solution that we are now working on is a very different one to the one that we first were thinking about when we started, just by going out and asking people, what are you doing about adaptation, and what are the barriers to you progressing that activity? And we've basically done that consultation work on a shoestring, because we had to kind of bid for little bits of funding from different places in order to facilitate it. We were very fortunate, got funding that had allowed our Cornwall Council to be a partner on that work, and their networks and their input into that discussion about what are the solutions and how do we then build the response to that consultation have been absolutely critical. So having a system that funds the academic community to come up with the question and then engage with our partners is fundamentally flawed. And I think until we can start to see some movement on that, we will always be playing catch up in terms of trying to twist questions that have been funded to actually make more sense in the real world, and to engage and involve collaborators in setting the question, not just being responsible for implementing the answer. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. That's really, really useful. Any other comments on this one from the panel? Any experiences to share? Sarah?
Well, to echo both what Emma and Lorraine have said, but we couldn't do this work without working with science experts and experts with experience. So, you know, whether that's the communities that use spaces that or are involved in climate change, or whether it's the people who manage these spaces. I work with park rangers a lot, and they're rarely included in the conversations. The more challenging, critical work that I've done are with Māori in New Zealand, who are collaborated out in the New Zealand context. But there are some really wonderful models of working with Indigenous communities, with local communities. And a lot of that work from a science and social science perspective involves mostly unlearning rather than learning. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, I'm hearing this idea of unlearning things that quite a lot recently, and I think it's a really good challenge and something could be very valuable. We've got some quite ingrained ways of working and thinking, I think, haven't we, in the academic space? Yeah. Martyn, are there any projects you could refer to in Cornwall that have really thrived or otherwise due to collaborative efforts?
I think I'd highlight that as a result of our work, our collaboration with Exeter University, is our understanding of actually the baseline from which we are starting our work and our climate change action plan. It's given us an understanding of the challenges that we can then portray to our communities as to what they need to be doing themselves in order to actually work towards our net zero targets. I could identify the various statistics that have come out of that research, which in some way scare the public into believing change is necessary. We're not in the arena for trying to scare people, but we do need to be giving them that reality check. So, for example, trying to explain that 88% of the emissions from industry and business in Cornwall need to come down by 88% in order for us to achieve those targets. So being able to present that information and our learning to the public is part of that collaboration.
Thank you, Martyn. That's very interesting. Could I maybe ask? Oh, sorry, Paul. Would you like to come in? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just so I suppose two very small examples. I should say our network's been focusing mostly on schools education, but you know, we are interested in broadening that out. Two small examples, I think. On the one hand, we encourage some climate scientists to talk to teachers at a conference, and as part of that, we actually had a process whereby they were engaging with curriculum experts, and there was some sort of support in terms of how they should target those communications and make them more relevant to the classroom. And I think that worked really well. And you certainly, you know, we know that when scientists talk directly to people, when people feel that scientists are you know, real, if you like, and they can interact, then it has a much greater impact in terms of behaviour and attitude. So that's a good thing. We're hoping to take that approach forward now into something a bit more a bit wider through a little bit of funding that we've managed to get. But so that's one good example. But I you know, in terms of talking about failures, and I think it is quite difficult talking about failures, and I'm not even sure I want to use the word failure, but in terms of experiencing a learning opportunity, we're very hot, I think. A lot of researchers that I work with are very hot on this idea of co-production and co-producing and collaboration. It's seen as something which is really, really important in education now. We don't do research on schools or on students. We work with students, with schools, with teachers. And so we went down quite an extended process of identifying research questions, developing an instrument with teachers. So they were really taking the role. But it actually, when what we produced ultimately did not actually, we didn't manage to recruit many teachers to actually provide us with the data that teachers had hoped they were going to produce from it. So I suppose it's just to say that even with the best will in the world and the best intentions, it's sometimes very easy to forget issues such as being, you know, very realistic about the amount of time, you know, that your collaborators might have. And of course, there are these other classic barriers for interdisciplinary collaboration, which are language, concepts, and professional aims. You know, I think there's a wonderful collaboratory sort of spirit in this area. Climate change does really, you know, my experience so far has been that it really does bring people together. But you still have those professional aims that you have to meet. Scientists still have to bring in their research grants. They have to publish their papers. Teachers still have to actually teach the literacy and numeracy. And so you're always, you know, struggling to try to negotiate a path, you know, between all these different professional aims to make sure that everyone's happy. So it's not always simple, but when it does work, very worthwhile. Great.
Thanks, Paul. And yeah, perhaps failure wasn't the best choice of word there from me earlier. Absolutely, I take that. We've got some questions around mental health and anxiety around climate change, which I'd like to come to in a moment. But before we do that, I wonder if I could also ask about the geography of our region, GW4, and the assets that we have, be they physical, natural, people, organisations, and ask the panel, what do you think is distinctive or interesting or valuable about this GW4 geography, and how do you think that should shape what we do with this alliance, and how we try to tackle climate change? Could I just maybe ask for any thoughts on that? Anybody like to kick us off with that one? Sara.
Thank you. We've just done some work with the Future Generations Commissioner's Office on future inequalities related to climate change, future of work, and ageing population. And I think it's really clear that we have to deal with inequality and injustice simultaneously and immediately with climate change. And this is because inequality in housing, in transport, in health, in income and access to good work is really real. And it's really real for the South Wales valleys. It's really real for those areas that are significantly deprived. So I think we cannot do this work without addressing those aspects. So when we're looking at carbon neutral, zero policies, net zero, we really need to look at the costs of installing boilers in homes, but also the potential improvements. There's some really good examples in the Welsh Government of the new soundscape policy, where they integrated planning decisions with, rather than looking at just soundscapes, they looked at places that are livable into the future. And it's a really good example of thinking about urban planning and thinking about the kind of everyday experiences of living in a community where sound is bad, the health consequences of living in an area where if you have increased noise, we know there's increase in cardiovascular disease, pollution, and actually building those into their planning policy has been, I think, watching that, listening to how that team has developed that has been really interesting. And I think they learned from Brighton in some of the work that they were doing as well. So just, yeah, I think we absolutely have to tackle those at the same time.
Thanks, Sara. That's really helpful. I do wonder whether people think it's important or significant that across GW4 we have got the Welsh and the UK governments, if you like, on our patch, and to what extent that's useful or interesting to explore. I'd be interested to hear what people think. Martyn, you wanted to come in here.
Thank you. I think that the thing that I'd highlight is that by nature, it is a largely rural area. I realise obviously there are some large conurbations within it, but I think we have a special role in identifying modal change around long-term mobility, for example. The recognition that within this region there are very significant pockets of rural poverty, and as Sara pointed out, those issues very much need highlighting within the region. And the other area that I would suggest that we may need to be focused or could consider focusing is around the long-term spatial strategy, particularly around housing, and the fact that we're starting to see a shift of the population from the southeast towards the southwest, which is clearly going to bring its own challenges. And indeed, following COVID and the pandemic and the changes in the way that we started to work, I think that migration from east to west could actually ramp up even further.
Thank you, Martin. Emma.
I just wanted to add one additional category, and that's coastal communities. Clearly, coastal communities are going to experience some very particular issues around climate change. And given the length and breadth of our coastline, particularly down here in Cornwall, I think there is some additional insights and opportunities for us as a network to address those issues.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think it's good for us to think about those specific attributes or assets or challenges that we might have in our patch to help shape what we do. So it's a distinctive contribution and relevant to our stakeholders. I'm just looking, if there aren't anybody desperate to come in on this one, I could move to the next question. Just pause there for a second to see. Okay, so I think I'll try and bundle together three of the questions that have cropped up here. One from Laura Fleming, Richard Fairchild, and Reza Zamani. And two of those are asking about young people or just the population in general, and anxiety around climate change, mental health, depression, and how we might try to support people who are experiencing that kind of climate anxiety, and can we help turn that climate anxiety into action and positive action. But also a comment about nudge theory and positive and negative futures, and a comment about, should we scare the public? And I think bundling that in with this anxiety and mental health and well-being, I think is quite interesting. Lorraine, please.
Yeah, so these are all questions that we're dealing with in our centre, actually. And I think just around the scaring point, I think we know that doesn't tend to work very well. We know that actually it can sort of make people switch off because they just feel that they can't deal with this, and they'd rather just carry on with their life and sort of hope it goes away. So I think the scaring tends to backfire, actually. What we need to do is present the risks of climate change, but in a way that highlights what people can do about those risks. So actually build a feeling of sort of efficacy, that I can make a difference. I can in some way take steps to reduce the risk to me, if we're talking about adapting to climate change, but also potentially channel what is a sort of growing anxiety amongst many people, or a frustration with lack of government action, into taking steps also to mitigate climate change, to reduce emissions. We know that in general, there is, while there are low levels of sort of clinical climate anxiety, I guess I would say, amongst the population, there's certainly pretty significant levels of people feeling that they don't sort of disempowered, and that they don't know what to do, and don't feel that there is anything that they can do to make a difference. But actually, if we can highlight the things that people can do, and that they can do collectively as well, so that they can actually sort of feel that they're part of a growing movement of people taking effective action, I think that's how we can sort of motivate people, mobilize people that are actually feeling quite worried about climate change into positive action.
Thanks, Lorraine. I think that's really helpful in response to those comments and questions. Would anyone else like to add anything here in this space? Martin.
Thank you. And I used the word scaring, which was probably not the best use of the description of just explaining to people the challenges that they're facing. One of the things, and as Lorraine pointed out, is sometimes there is that sense of hopelessness with people as to what can I as an individual do. And one of the things that certainly in Cornwall we've been doing is promoting a local CIC community interest company called Climate Vision has come up with a simple 10 pledges which everybody can can play their part in. And so when somebody says, well, you know, what part can I play? We signpost them towards the 10 pledges through our Climate Change Hive and through Climate Vision's website. And that's just simple things like considering changing your energy supplier, maybe buying one meal a week from a local source rather than the supermarket, and actually just educating yourself on climate change. So I'd point people towards something like those 10 simple actions that they as an individual might be able to take.
Great, yeah, it would be good to see those, Martin. Maybe you could share those pledges with us. Thank you. Paul.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what's been said. I think the worst thing you can do in a way is just to say that we're all doomed and then just leave it there. Sort of Tim Smith's first message, if you don't follow it up with something that can actually be done about it. So the idea is that you, in terms of the educational literature, seems to be that you need to provide something that stimulates concern but also hope at the same time. And there's also, you know, literature support that supports the idea that action actually can be quite, you know, that can really sort of remediate some of this anxiety. And so therefore, sorts of projects that might be introduced to young people in schools, for example, should be ones that raise awareness and understanding about the negatives of climate change, but at the same time offer possibilities to do something about it and engage students actively in doing that. But you can't skip the bad news. So, you know, some research shows, for example, that if you're talking about climate change in terms of narratives, then actually a negatively valenced ending, in other words, an ending to the story that says but still nothing has been done, or is actually more likely to lead to action than one which is positively valenced and says, you know, but this group over here is doing something, you know, so a little bit of chirpy good news at the end. So actually emotions are really important to this, and it is quite a difficult issue, I think, for teachers, because actually I don't think teachers are very well supported in terms of understanding the emotions of learning and how those are intertwined. It's something they're sort of left to work out for themselves. And so I think support is needed there in terms of the emotional education, if you like, of teachers and students. But also, how widespread is eco-anxiety amongst children? Actually, we don't know. We really don't know. There's been a lot of stuff in the press about it, where children have been given surveys saying tick the box if you're really worried about climate change. But children's worries, they have a lot of other worries. I mean, one of the most common ones is that they're worried about how they're getting on with their work, and they're worried also about their friends and sometimes about life at home. What would be really helpful is if we had some research that showed the relative worry around climate change compared with some of these other everyday issues that children face, so that we've got some idea of whether it's actually rising to the surface of these worries. So I think, you know, there's work to be done here in terms of research.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, Emma, would you like to come back in?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all those points, absolutely. And I think the other thing that I found really interesting is trying to explore what the climate change means at a local level. So we get a lot of national and international climate models, but actually when you start to try and break that down to what does climate change really mean to you in your local area, it's not all bad news all of the time. Particularly in the southwest, there are some bits, you know, little nuggets, little slips, it slips through the cracks, but there's a little bit of, you know, where the climate actually might be more favourable for some positive behaviour. And I think in terms of how do we talk about this, but particularly for people who have a very local perspective, it's important that we talk about it realistically. So, you know, in the southwest, we're not going to get that, certainly not initially, those rapid increases in temperature. And actually, it may be for a while quite pleasant. But that in and of itself will have the own knock-on, like this suggestion that we're going to see migration into the area. So, you know, there are challenges on this, but they may not be what we are thinking they're going to be, in that when it's not going to be a massive drought immediately for everybody. So I think there's a piece of work to be done, which is something that we've started to look at with collaborators at the Met Office, is around local climate modelling, so that we can be realistic at a local level about what climate change actually means for our local communities.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Emma. I think some really good comments there, everyone. Thank you very much. A question here that I think I'll jump to that relates, that's coming through here from Melissa, and also backed up by Rebecca, is, I suppose, maybe you could infer that with a lot of the comments we've made so far, we're thinking about what the individual can do. But I think there's some questions here saying, well, hang on a minute, you know, what about organisations? What can big industry, what can councils do, and how important is that? And maybe not putting all the onus on individuals. So I think there are some questions for you there, Martyn, some challenging questions about what are Cornwall Council actually doing? Are they walking the walk? What commitments are they making, and how it's really important to show leadership there if we're going to expect individuals to do things as well. So I don't know, Martyn, whether you could say a little bit more there. I don't want to heap all of the burden onto Cornwall Council, but I think just flipping the conversation now into thinking about organisations, not just individuals, might be useful for a moment. Martyn?
Yes, okay, so where to start? Don't mean to blow a trumpet, but we are being recognised at the moment as probably being the leading local authority in terms of climate change action at the moment. And actually, I'd probably urge everyone to go on the Cornwall Council website, just put Cornwall Council climate change into the search engine, and you'll be able to see the extent of the work we were doing, from a community level right through to national engagement. So, for example, being the first rural region that is part of UK 100. At a local level, we to coincide with COP26, we've actually going to be launching a virtual workshop conference event on the 8th of November called Talks Climate. And that is going to start a series of conversations across all sectors, all parts of society, within different separate portfolio areas, where people can start to discuss amongst themselves what they feel that they can be doing. Our particular interest at the moment, for example, around getting a sector-based partnership and panel up and running, where we've got climate change interested individuals right across from farming, tourism, industry, construction, who I meet with on a quarterly basis, and they talk amongst themselves within our panel meetings, and then go away to see how they can actually inspire their own sectors on climate change and improvement. Clearly, there's the day job that we're doing within the council. So things like, for example, our current project to see another 150 public charging points within our car parks. Our collaboration work with Bannerman's on our council farms, where slurry pits are being redeveloped, covered over to generate biomethane, to generate electricity, and also power our fleet of vehicles. So both in terms of action and in terms of communication with the community, I think we're doing so much to highlight any one thing would probably be discrediting the other great work being done across the county, across the duchy. But as I say, go to the council website. Also, if you put Cornwall Council climate change high into the search engine, that you'll find that's an interactive area where you can discuss actions that the council are taking, and indeed highlight your own projects and initiatives that you may wish to share.
Thanks very much, Martyn. That's really helpful. Paul.
Yeah, would it be okay if I just ask Martyn a question? I'm very curious about this, because I mean, one of the arguments that I make for the importance of education in this area is that you can only go as fast as a politician in terms of how people are going to actually react to that. I was thinking, like, recently of the example of Switzerland, that took the changes they needed to undertake to meet their Paris agreements to the people, because they vote on everything in Switzerland, and they lost quite, amazing, which really surprised and shocked a lot of people. I think it's like 51 to 49%. Really set back their policies in this area. So you must be, I mean, do you not feel all the time that you are treading on you're walking this tightrope really between what you'd like to see happen and what people will actually put up with, which presumably has a lot to do with how they perceive what's going on?
In a way, you've hit the nail on the head there, Paul, in that, yes, that's politics, isn't it? My focus, and the focus that I've given to our climate change team within the council, is to focus on that 60% in the middle and bring them on the journey. Because, as you say, it is a tightrope. You don't want to alienate people. You don't want to actually be moving too quickly that you lose people's confidence and faith. But at the same time, we appreciate that actually we're not moving quickly enough, and so actually the only way to accelerate is to actually bring more people on board. And that's why we're there's 20% of the population totally get this, and to be honest, as a council, we could probably never do enough to satisfy their voracious demand for rapid carbon reduction. And there's the other 20% at the other end. We're going to be expending an awful lot of energy for not much traction. But that's 60% in the middle. If we can bring them along that journey, and they're the people that are on the tightrope with us. And if we can get that 60% up close to the top 20%, then they'll do the job for us. And it's creating that peer pressure and acceptance that yes, I can do my bit, and actually making it a socially antisocial, a socially unacceptable thing to not be green.
Thanks, Martin. I'm aware of time here, and I think we can carry on for a few more minutes, but I better probably try to move us towards a conclusion now. We've got some good questions about how can we collaborate to impart more urgency, and also some questions about the importance of education and interdisciplinary education, interdisciplinary PhD programs, for example. So maybe we can just park those and take them forward as we develop our thinking for the Climate Alliance. But I'd like to ask one final question and put you all on the spot a little bit now, if I could. And what I would say is that if you found yourself tomorrow in Kwasi Kwarteng's job, and you could make a policy change next week to drive forward the way that we tackle climate change, what policy change would you make? What single policy change would you make next week if you found yourself in that position with that ability to do? I'll pause for a little bit because I have put you on the spot. Okay, thank you, Lorraine. And then Martin.
Just because this is quick and easy and it would be pretty effective, I would go with ensuring that all public sector catering has a majority of vegetarian and vegan food on it, because we know that just increasing the availability of vegetarian and vegan food makes people more likely to choose it. And so it doesn't even remove choice completely, so it won't even be unpopular. But it will make a significant change in behaviour. So that would be my first thing that I do.
Great, thanks, Lorraine. We'll note that one down. Martin.
Bit of a cheat, this one, because I wrote to Kwasi Kwarteng on this a week or so ago, and it's more of an ask than a policy, and that is around enabling and funding each region to do an energy policy, because that's one of the biggest challenges that we have, certainly down here in Cornwall and the southwest, is grid capacity and actually how we move electricity about the region, which is going to be essential if we're going to see a sea change in the use of renewables, and particularly the generation of renewables down here in Cornwall.
So devolving some of the power to the regions as well as having all the responsibilities.
So we asked the minister for £500,000 to do just that and produce that strategy.
Thank you, Martin. Another good one. Any other thoughts, anybody? Sarah, Emma, Paul, Emma?
Yeah, I'm not sure whether it falls within his remit or not, but I think one of the things that I would like to see a change is a change in how we support micro and small SMEs to bring their innovations to market. There's so many barriers, even looking at the way Innovate UK operate, for some of those really early ideas in very small companies that actually have some great ideas, and one or two of them get picked up, but we lose so many of those innovations because the system doesn't support the innovator at an early enough stage and at a small enough stage in their business development program. So I'd like to see some alternative thinking to seed fund those really early ideas.
Thanks, Emma. Another good one. Sarah?
I think I'd really look at the future of work and the precarity that exists within the kind of green sector and environmental sector. So real proper jobs within that sector, proper training within the sectors, right across the board, including I think what Emma suggested, but at a local and regional level, is really making sure that we tackle work, because a livable life is part of what we need to address in terms of climate change as well.
Thank you, Sarah. Paul?
Well, I think you'd have to have a word with the Minister for Education to put mine into action. But what I'd like to see is putting the human impacts of climate change into the national curriculum, even though actually half the children that go to state schools in this country don't need to follow the national curriculum anymore. It would just send a very clear message. And this would also incorporate some of the other panel members, such as Lorraine and Sarah's ideas, I think, because that would include reviewing the school's energy policies and what's happening in the canteen as well, which is something a lot of schools are doing, but every school should be doing it.
Great, thank you, Paul. So we've got policy changes around innovation, food, devolution to the regions, the future of work, training, good quality, secure jobs, and education, and embedding this in the national curriculum. Thank you very much. We're just about out of time there, so I think we'll have to stop, but I hope you all enjoyed it, panelists, and I hope that the people watching this and participating enjoyed it as well. I'm sorry we didn't get through every question, but I think we got through most of them. So thank you very much to the panel. Great stuff. And thank you, everybody.